Okay, good morning and welcome back to our last discussion of the circulatory system. So we mentioned that the circulatory system is the combination of the effects and activities of three parts. Number one, the pump. Who's the pump in our circulatory system? The heart. So the heart is our pump. And number two, in addition to the pump, we have the fluid that is being pumped. The fluid, the fluid that is being pumped by this pump, the heart. What's the fluid? The fluid is the blood. And this blood that is being pumped by the heart, the pump, is flowing inside conduits, inside conduits, inside tubes. And these tubes are not made of plastic. What do we call these tubes in which the blood is flowing through? They contain the blood containers. What do we call them? Blood vessels. Thank you. So these are the blood vessels. So we finished the heart, we finished the blood. Now it's time to discuss the blood vessels. And we mentioned the most important thing to know is that these blood vessels are alive. The blood vessels are made up of a special type of cell known as the endothelial cells. These are known as the endothelial cells. These endothelial cells are alive, meaning that they can communicate and they can talk to each other. So these cells, known as the endothelial cells that make our blood vessels, these are interesting type of cells, and we will see how interesting are they from multiple perspectives. But remember, these blood vessels, these endothelial cells, have a nucleus. You see this big circle? This big dark circle represents a nucleus. Now, inside, this is your blood vessel. The blood is flowing inside this blood vessel. And the blood vessel has a nucleus. What does that mean? That means it has the capacity to do what? Let's say one cell is damaged. You know, the blood is flowing inside the blood vessel. Blood is flowing, this red blood is flowing inside the blood vessel. Let's say that there is a contusion or a laceration or there's an abrasion, and then one of those cells get traumatized or damaged. So the blood is now leaking. The blood is now falling to the outside. What do you think these cells are going to do now? They're just going to sit there. They're going to sit there and allow blood to leak and to hemorrhage endlessly? What's the response of these endothelial cells? These cells that make the blood vessels. What is their response? Those cells are now going to, first of all, wait for the platelets. What did we call the platelets? Platelets are also known as what? Platelets. Platelets are known as what? Are known as thrombocytes. Very good. Thrombocytes. That's anatomically. But in their job, we gave them a nickname that begins with a B. Band. These are band aids. So the platelets are going to come and they are going to be like plates to block the loss of blood. Why do we want to ensure that we don't lose blood? Because if you lost blood, you lose red blood cells, you lose nutrients, you lose white blood cells, you lose plasma, and the tissue is not going to receive as much. The tissue is not going to receive the nutrients it was waiting for, the hormones, and also the removal of the metabolic waste that builds up on the tissue is not going to get removed. So after the platelets, and then the white blood cells are going to come and they're going to fight any bacteria. Bacteria cannot wait. The bacteria cannot wait to infiltrate and to damage the to infiltrate and to damage this. Take the opportunity that there is a blood leakage in the blood vessels. So they're going to make plate here, and then there is a process where new blood vessel cells are going to start to arise. So now you're going to make a new blood vessel cell in place of the one that was damaged. Healing. What's the name of the process of the known as the sprouting? Sprouting. The sprouting of blood vessels. Sprouting of blood vessels. When you make new blood vessels, you make new blood vessels. What is this process known as? What is this process known as? When we make new blood vessels, this is known as angiogenesis. You need to remember that. Angiogenesis. These are two words in one. You know what genesis mean? What does genesis mean? The making of. So new making would be neogenesis. Neo means new. Neo means new. But we don't have neogenesis. We have angiogenesis. So genesis is the making, while angio means blood vessels. Blood vessels. So when we make blood vessels, when we make new blood vessels, this is known as angiogenesis, which is the sprouting of blood vessels or the making of new blood vessels. What is that called? The process of making new blood vessels. What is that known as? Okay, so you guys have to pay attention and you have to participate. Okay, so next lecture, I'm gonna print out a list of the whole class, and I'm gonna check off if you participate or not. If you don't participate, you're gonna get a 0. Okay, if you're just gonna sit around and just look or wandering around, that's not gonna count for attendance. So you have to participate. What is angiogenesis? Yeah, so the making of new blood vessels. Now, cancer is excellent at that because cancer is uncontrollable cell division. Many cells. What is cancer? Cancer is uncontrollable cell division. Now, these new cells that are made in cancer, they are cells. So in the end of the day, they need blood too. They need oxygen too. Your normal blood, your normal cells in your tissue, they need oxygen. Cancer cells need oxygen too. Your normal cells in your systemic tissues, they also need nutrients. Your cancer cells need nutrients too. Your normal tissue cells need plasma. Cancer cells need plasma too. So the substance of life is blood. Everybody needs blood, normal cells or cancer cells. But cancer cells are not part of our normal bodily system. So how are they gonna survive? So they're gonna need to make rerouting. Gonna need to make new routes of blood vessels. So they're gonna need to make angiogenesis. So the cancer cells in patients who unfortunately develop cancer, when they develop cancer, what happens? Their cancer cells are gonna make blood vessels, new blood vessels that gonna bring to ensure to bring them blood because they want to live too. They want to live to kill the person. So they're gonna need blood. So now there's new medications that are coming out that stop cancer cells from making of these new blood vessels. So, they made these medications and they're actually helping prolong the life, the quality of life for many cancer patients because now, once they take that medication, the cancer cell is going to die because it can no longer do what? It can no longer receive what? The cancer cell can no longer perform sprouting of blood vessels and it can no longer perform angiogenesis. Is that clear? Okay, so now once we start talking about the blood vessels, when we start talking about the blood vessels, we obviously have to begin with the anatomy, the structure of the blood vessels. The blood vessels have three structures. One layer, then you have layer number two in the middle, layer number two, layer number two, and lastly, you have layer number three. Every single blood vessel is gotta have how many layers? How many layers? 3 layers, known as the three tunics. So you have the inner layer known as the tunica interna. The middle layer is in the middle, is known as, this is the tunica interna, also known as the tunica minima, because it's all the way inside and it's very thin, minima, the tunica minima. Then there is a middle layer known as the tunica media. The tunica media. Then there is an outer layer known as the tunica externa. Tunica externa, or the tunica maxima. This is very important for you to know. Every blood vessel is made up of 3 layers in one. Now, the inner layer is known as the tunica intima or minima, and the middle layer is known as the tunica media, and the outer layer is known as the tunica externa or maxima. Now, we discussed that we have two types of blood vessels based on the direction of blood flow. We said that there are arteries, and there are veins. And we discussed that many students have the problem of assuming that arteries carry red blood, arteries carry oxygenated blood, while veins carry deoxygenated blood. And we said that this is a very, very wrong misconception. Some arteries carry oxygenated blood, some arteries carry oxygenated blood, and some arteries carry deoxygenated blood. Okay, veins carry oxygenated blood, and they also carry deoxygenated blood. So this is not a matter It's not a matter of are we carrying blue blood versus red blood. This is a matter of the direction of the blood flow. So we have arteries that carry blood away from the heart. Now that's an excellent convention. Away from the heart. All arteries, whether carrying oxygenated blood, systemic arteries, whether carrying deoxygenated blood, pulmonary arteries, they're all going away from the heart. No arteries going towards the heart. And we have veins that are carrying blood towards the heart. So this is an absolute rule. It's an absolute rule that absolutely, completely, perfectly, every single artery is carrying blood away from the heart. And every single vein is carrying blood towards the heart. So if we examine now, we will see that are all the structures of the arteries equal in their thickness and strength? Obviously not. Where do you assume that the arteries are going to be the strongest? Closest to the heart or far away from the heart? Closest to the heart. Why are the arteries closest to the heart are going to be really thick and really strong? Like the aorta. If you look at the aorta, it's really thick. Why is that? Excellent. Because the pump, you're right next to the pump. Imagine how strong the heart is pumping the blood and how much blood is gushing out, rushing out of the heart. So that is now going to be very, very strong and high velocity and high blood pressure. So if you had a really thin blood vessel, it's going to rupture. It's going to break. And we're going to have an aneurysm. What's an aneurysm? What's an aneurysm? What's an aneurysm? It happens in the brain. One of the places you mentioned, the brain bleed. Yes, that's one of the places. But you can have an aneurysm in the kidney, God forbid. You can have an aneurysm, in the spleen. So what is it? Yes, Ariana. Excellent. When the blood vessel becomes so thin that a balloon forms. An aneurysm is a balloon. Are you following me? An aneurysm is a balloon. So you had a blood vessel that looks like that, but because the patient has so much blood pressure, because they eat so much salt or the animal meat, that is going to make the blood pressure, or they're stressed out all the time, and the blood pressure, or smoking something, or substance abuse, drug dependence, the blood pressure is so high, it hits the walls of the blood vessel with so much strength that what happens to the wall of the blood vessel? The wall of the blood vessel is going to start to get destroyed. Then a balloon is going to form. A balloon is going to form. This balloon now, when the blood is flowing, some of the blood is gonna, some of the blood is going to, some of the blood is going to circulate and is going to build up inside the balloon. Then this blood is gonna get coagulated and thick and strong, and then it's gonna rupture the balloon. When the balloon ruptures, what's going to happen to all the blood? The blood is now going to hemorrhage. It's going to burst, and the blood is now you're going to have an internal hemorrhage. So an aneurysm is an internal hemorrhage due to a balloon that forms on the surface of the blood vessel, and that causes the blood to hemorrhage out of the blood vessel. So that is the aneurysm. So you will see today that these tunics, the tunica intima, the tunica media, the tunica externa, they serve you. But when you get older, If you're the type of person who eats a lot of animal meat, if you eat a lot of salt, or if you eat a lot of sugary food, they cannot handle that for too long. So then they're gonna start rupturing, and a lot of aneurysm gonna happen, especially in the brain. So let's now go to the slides. So there are three principal categories of blood vessels: the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. Now, I haven't talked a lot about the capillaries. So we only talked a lot about the arteries and the veins, but we haven't talked a lot about the capillaries. So let's now discuss these very important capillaries. The capillaries are where they both meet. So you know the heart is going to, so this is the heart. The left heart receives good blood and pumps out good blood, and then the blood is going to go out to the capillaries. Then, so the capillaries have these pores, these holes, these fenestrations, these capillaries, these holes, these fenestrations. And what is outside here? What is outside here? What is this? What is this? What is that? So the capillary is up here. So we have the capillary is a circulation, is a micro circulation. It has two halves, one blue half and one red half. One blue half and one red half. But what's the green? That's your tissue. So we're pumping blood in arteries and receiving it in veins. Why are we doing all of that? Because we're trying to deliver to the tissue. So now the blood is going to leave the heart and it's going to go to the capillary, and the arrow is going to point out. The arrow is going to point out. The arrow is going to point out to the tissue. Why is the arrow pointing out? Because the blood is flowing from the arterial side or the red side. This side is rich in what? In oxygen. It has a high partial pressure of oxygen. This side has a low partial pressure of carbon dioxide because it's just coming from the lungs. This side has a lot of nutrients. So everything is going to come out to the tissue. We're going to be pointing out to the tissue. So this tissue is going to receive the red blood. The Uber Eats just arrived. Now when the tissue receives this blood, the oxygenated blood, and receives the nutrients, it's going to perform metabolism. The tissue is going to perform metabolism to make energy, ATP, to make energy. Why do we need ATP? Why are we doing all of this? Oxygen, to make sure we breathe, so there's oxygen, and the oxygen gets to the tissue, and the tissue makes ATP. So why bother with doing all of this? Yes, so for cellular respiration, we take oxygen, we make ATP. And why do we need ATP? For enzymes. Now these enzymes, why do we need to give them ATPs? So we mentioned we need oxygen so we can give it to the tissue to perform cellular respiration and make ATP, and we need to give ATP to the enzymes because enzymes do not work for free. And then why do we need enzymes to work? Excellent. To perform the metabolism, because that is life. You cannot have life without metabolism. So do enzymes only establish metabolism? What else do enzymes do? Homeostasis. 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 So after the tissue now performs metabolism, what's the next step? It needs to send back all of the toxic. You cannot just receive, when you order food, you have to throw out the garbage. You order takeout, and you order Uber Eats, and then you have to throw it out. When the tissue uses oxygen to make ATP, are there no metabolic waste? Is there no metabolic waste? Is there no nitrogenous waste building up? So that's all is a natural byproduct of metabolism. So we need to send that back into the blue side of the circulation. What do we call the red side of the circulation? We call that the arterial side of the circulation, while the blue side of the circulation is called the venous side of the circulation. Are we clear? Are we clear? So now you see how the arrows. One side, even though this whole thing is known as the capillary microcirculation, what is this whole thing known as? The capillary microcirculation. Are we clear? This capillary microcirculation is cut in half. One half for the arterial oxygenated side and one half for the venous side. Now, if you look into the venous side, is now going to receive through the vena cava. So this is your intraarterial septum. So you see here, this is the heart with its atrioventricular valve, and this is the bicuspid valve. And you see now we are receiving bad blood from the venous side of the circulation, and we are bringing good blood towards the arterial side of the microcirculation. So this is your capillary. So both of them, these are your veins. They are veins because the arrow is pointing to the heart. We're going back to the heart. So these are veins, while these are arteries because the arrow is pointing to the system away from the heart. So that makes them arteries. But both of them, they converge here in this unit known as the capillary microcirculation, where on the red side the arrow is pointing out, sending the oxygen, nutrients out, while the arrow is pointing in from the tissue, bringing back the metabolic waste. Later on, you're going to learn when we're doing the lymphatic system. You're going to learn that today, what powers the movement and the oozing out. You see through these holes, all of the oxygen, all of the beneficial stuff for the tissue is coming out. Who's powering the movement? Remember, we said fluids do not move except from an area of a high pressure to an area of a low pressure. So what's making the material to come out of this side of the circulation? There's the hydrostatic pressure from the heart. So the heart is pumping. So the heart is pumping. This is known as hydrostatic pressure. This hydrostatic pressure is causing the movement of fluid from the capillary into the tissues. Then what is doing the opposite? What is making the pressure go from the tissues into the blue circulation? Anybody knows? So the red side of your microcirculation, can you guys see the microcirculation? So the red side, the arrow is pointing out. So the blood has arrived to the microcirculation, and now it's oozing out. The fluid is going out from the microcirculation to enrich and nourish the tissue. But after the tissue uses the blood, now we have sanitation. Now we have toxic metabolic waste. So we need to send this toxic metabolic waste back to the heart. So now you see the arrow is pointing. First, the arrow is pointing from red into green. Now the arrow is pointing from green into blue. What's causing that pressure? What's causing the pressure on the red side is the hydrostatic pressure. What is causing the pressure on the blue side? This is known as the, do not say hydrostatic pressure, because hydrostatic means you're pumping. There's mechanical activity. So here, the heart is pumping. That is hydrostatic pressure. But here, is the tissue pumping? Is the tissue squeezing? It's not. So what is making the fluid move now? It's known as the osmotic pressure. That's the hydrostatic pressure on this side. But this side, we have the osmotic, known as colloid pressure. Are we clear? Osmotic or colloid pressure. Okay, so those are the capillaries. So they connect the smallest. So by the way, here you have a big size arteries. Here you have the smallest. So these are the smallest venules. So the closer you are to the heart, the bigger you are as a vein or an artery. And the farthest away you are from the heart, and the closer you are to the tissue capillary microcirculation, the smaller you're going to be as a artery, and the small and narrow and thin, because you're so far away from the heart. You're not dealing with so much blood pressure. Is that clear? Okay. So these are micrographs of the blood vessels. We're going to look at them on the microscopes. You're going to look at them you're going to be able to visualize them and zoom in and zoom out and magnify to see, the tunica media, the tunica intima, the tunica externa. So now this is the histology of the blood vessels. We discussed that. So do you see where my mouse is? Now this is the heart. The closer you are to the heart, the bigger the blood vessel is. And the farther you go away from the heart, you see how thin they get. They get really thin when they're far away from the heart. And you must also understand, we discussed that we have three tunics. We have three levels. The tunica externa on the outside, and the tunica media in the middle, and the tunica interna on the inside. Is that clear? Okay, now if you examine these big blood vessels, what do we call them? We call them conducting. These are known as conducting arteries. These are like the highways. You know the BQE? The Major Deegan Expressway? Those are the really big highways. So the big blood vessels, the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, those are the big highways. We call them conducting arteries and conducting veins. Is that clear? Then once you're on a highway, does the highway bring you right to your home, or do you need an exit ramp? A smaller little street, something that's smaller than the highway, the exit ramp. So these are called distributing arteries. So when the blood is getting closer, when the blood vessel is getting closer to the tissue microcirculation, it's going to leave the highway. It's going to leave the distributing blood vessels, and it's going to enter into the exit ramp known as the distributing arteries. And then lastly, After you take the exit ramp, how do you get to your home? You take the street, which is much smaller compared to the exit ramp and compared to the highway. Same thing. Once we want to get to the capillary microcirculation, what do we take now? We take the arteriole and the venule. You need to know that the arteriole and the venule are the smallest. They are like the streets. And then in the middle, the exit ramps are like distributing vessels. And then the conducting, these are the highways, the really big vessels. So that shows you here when you look at the conducting large arteries and large veins, you see that we have a tunica interna, and you have a basement membrane between the endothelium and between the tunica media, and then you see there's the tunica media and the tunica externa. The tunica externa is like a connective tissue that surrounds and wraps the blood vessel to give it structural support and integrity. If you look now, there's histology of the blood vessels. You see that in the tunica externa, there is an endothelium, there's a basement membrane, and there are valves that allow for the passage of the blood. Now, if you look here, you find tunica interna. So here there are endothelium, and these are your arterioles and venules. Are these distributing, conducting, or what do we call those? Really tiny, these really small blood vessels that deliver to or take away from the capillary microcirculation. What do we call them? Distributing arteries. Very good. Okay, so now arteries are divided into three classes by size. We discussed that. There's the conducting, known as elastic or large arteries. These are the biggest, and you need to know that we have an aorta and the common carotid going up to the upper extremities. We have distributing or muscular or medium arteries. They distribute blood to specific organs. Examples would be brachial, femoral, renal, and splenic arteries. And lastly, you have the really tiny blood vessels known as the resistance or small arteries. Those are the arteries that bring in blood into the capillary microcirculation. So the resistance arteries, those are the ones that gauge how much blood is going into the capillaries. So why do we need to send blood into the capillaries? Why do we need to send blood into the capillaries? In order to? Excellent. In order to distribute the blood into the tissues. Then the tissues are going to metabolize and perform oxidative phosphorylation to make ATP, and then all the waste is going to be sent where? All the waste is going to be sent into the venous side, the blue side, and then the venous side is going to send it back to the heart to pump it where? To the lungs. Now the meta-arterioles, these are known as the thoroughfare channel. I think one of the questions on the homework was the thoroughfare channels. These are short vessels that link the arterioles directly to the venules in some places. And they provide shortcuts allowing the blood to pass these capillary beds. We discussed what's an aneurysm. An aneurysm is a balloon, because it's not actually a balloon. It became a balloon because there's a weak point. Imagine you have a water hose and then there is a really thin weak point. The water is going to push, and is going to make like a balloon surrounding the blood vessel. A dissecting aneurysm is when the blood accumulates between the tunics and separate them. That's why we call it a dissecting aneurysm, because the aneurysm is right in the middle between different structures, between different tunics. You know, we have the tunica intima, tunica media, tunica externa. And why are aneurysms dangerous? Why are we concerned with having an aneurysm? Because aneurysm can cause an internal hemorrhage and internal bleeding. And as you see here, you see there is a splenic aneurysm and the blood is hemorrhaging inside into the blood vessel. So now, in the walls of some major vessels, there are sensory structures that monitor the blood pressure and the chemistry, and they transmit the information to the brain stem to regulate the heart rate, the blood vessel diameter, and the respiratory rate. We discussed this concept before. Remember when we discussed that, we have to maintain the homeostasis of all the physiological variables. Like, we don't want hypertension or hypotension, we want eutension. We don't want hyperoxemia, too much oxygen. We don't want too little oxygen, hypoxemia. We want euoxemia. Yes, we can restore and repair homeostasis, but we need somebody to alarm us, to alert us that there is a problem. There is a deviation in the homeostasis. There's a deviation in the homeostasis. Who is the sensor? Who is the detector that is always constantly monitoring and reporting to the integration center, to your brain stem, that there is a problem with the blood pressure, there is a problem with the oxygen, to your brainstem. Your brainstem is the integration processing center. Your brain stem is your processing and integration center. Processing and integration center. Processing and integration center. That's the brainstem. So the brainstem is going to process and integrate. Do we have the normal balanced homeostatic oxygen? Do we have the normal balanced homeostatic blood pressure? And it's going to send out an output. And we said the output is motor as well as efferent. But who's responsible for sending a sensory input that is afferent? Who's responsible for that? Who tells us, is blood pressure increasing or decreasing? Who's responsible for doing that? Who's the sensor? We need a sensor. Who is the sensor? Who is the detector that's gonna sense and detect for us sensory input and afferent information? Yes. Excellent. So these baroreceptors are important for, these are a type of a mechanoreceptors. These mechanoreceptors, special types of mechanoreceptors known as the baroreceptors. So do we only, when we are in the circulatory system, do we only deal with blood pressure problems? Do we just need to ensure that blood pressure is not too high or too low? Or do we need to also monitor other things in the circulatory system? Like oxygen level, that one is important too. Imagine you're pumping blood, but the blood is not rich in oxygen. You're up there in the mountain, you're on top of the mountain. Is there a lot of oxygen in the air? when you are at the top of the mountain? If you are in the top of the mountain, is there a lot of air? There isn't. So when there is not a lot of air, your blood pressure is fine, but is it rich in oxygen? So we don't only monitor blood pressure, we monitor how rich is this blood that we're pumping with oxygen. Is it rich with oxygen or not? So for those, what are we going to need? Are we going to need the pressure sensors now? We're going to need chemoreceptors. What do chemoreceptors do? Chemoreceptors, they taste the blood. They taste the blood. Is it rich in oxygen? Is it deficient in oxygen? If the blood is rich in oxygen, they're not going to report any problem. If it's not rich in oxygen, those chemoreceptors, they're going to taste the blood. Oh my God, this blood doesn't have any oxygen. We need more oxygen. So what are they going to do? They're going to send to the brainstem some input sensory afferent information that there is not a lot of oxygen in the blood. What is the brainstem going to do now? Make the heart pump faster, harder? It's not an issue of blood pressure anymore. The blood pressure is fine. The issue is oxygen. So what is the brainstem going to do now? Is it going to tell something to do to the heart? The heart is working fine. What is it going to tell who to do? To do what? Yes, the lungs. Now the brainstem is going to tell the lungs to breathe faster. And then you're going to have hyperventilation. So you're ventilating more rapidly. Why? Because you want to increase the saturation of blood with oxygen. Is that clear? Where do we find the baroreceptors? Now they're telling you the anatomical landmarks. Where do we find our baroreceptors? We find them in the internal carotid artery. These are known as the carotid sinuses. And there they are. So the baroreceptors, there are two types of receptors: baroreceptors and chemoreceptors. Why do we need baroreceptors and chemoreceptors? Who can tell me? Why don't we just have one type of receptor, the baroreceptor, to tell us if the blood pressure is too high or too low? Why do we need to go out of our way and make sure that there is chemoreceptors? Yes. Yeah, so they detect chemical changes such as oxygen and carbon dioxide. Very good. So you need to know where do you find your baroreceptors. This figure is very important. Baroreceptors are found on the aortic arch and in the carotid sinuses. Do you see? Where my mouse now? That's the carotid sinuses. There's baroreceptors there. And there's in the aortic arch, there is baroreceptors. The aortic bodies containing the chemoreceptors, there are aortic bodies and there are carotid bodies. The carotid bodies and the aortic bodies have the chemoreceptors. So the aortic arch and the carotid sinuses, the aortic arch, you see where my mouse is? The aortic arch and the carotid sinuses. Carotid sinus. Those have your baroreceptors, which are an example of mechanoreceptors. But the aortic arch and carotid sinuses have your baroreceptors. But the aortic body and the carotid body, the aortic body and the carotid body, they both have the chemoreceptors to monitor that we're not only just pumping oxygen, we want to make sure it's rich in oxygen. We're not only pumping blood, that it's rich in oxygen too. Are we clear? Capillaries. These are the exchange vessels where gases, nutrients, waste, and hormones pass between the blood and the tissue fluid compartment. So part of the microvasculature, known as the microcirculation, it also includes the arterioles and the venules. So nearly every cell in the body is close to a capillary. Exceptions are the capillaries that are absent in the tendons, in the ligaments. So if you look here, you find a special type of blood capillary pigment known as the pericyte. You need to know that. What's a pericyte? What's a Pericyte? What's a pericyte? Can everybody see what I'm pointing to? You see this pinkish structure? This pericyte? Yes. Pericyte. You're talking about parasite. Parasite is with an A. Parasite. Parasite. That's like when a worm or some type of microbe is harming you and they're surviving off of you. Squatting. But this is not a parasite. This is a pericyte. P-E-R-I. So a pericyte is this pinkish connective tissue capillary. Now this pericyte is found where? In your eye, in your retina. So people who have diabetes, when they do the diabetic retinal exam, or when they do the hypertension retinal exam, and the ophthalmologist sees that there is blood rupturing in their retina, where did that blood come from? It came from the who ruptured, who exploded, who blew up. It was the pericyte. So that's a very thin capillary. It cannot handle a lot of sugar in your blood. It will explode. It cannot handle a lot of cholesterol and the animal meat. It will explode. It cannot handle high blood pressure and anxiety and depression and exertion that is beyond moderate. That is going to cause these parasites to explode. And then when you do the diabetic or hypertension retinal exam, there's going to be an explosion. You find blood in there. So those are capillaries. What are pericytes? Pericytes are capillaries that are very thin and they're found in the retina. Okay, so that shows you. Now, if you examine here, there is no pericyte. So not all capillaries have a pericyte. Some capillaries have pericytes, some capillaries don't. Some capillaries have fenestrations, holes, some don't. And some capillaries are very interesting. These are known as the sinusoids. Sinusoids. Where do we find the sinusoids? We find the sinusoids in the liver and in the spleen. In the liver and in the spleen. And these are blood-filled squares. So you find that they are irregular blood-filled spaces. These are these sinusoids. So sinusoids are blood-filled spaces. And you see that, what did we say the graveyard of red blood cell was? Who was the graveyard of red blood cell? The spleen. Very good. So the spleen is made up of irregular spaces that are full of blood. So you see that these are the irregular spaces, and you have your endothelial cells that are inside of the liver. So these sinusoids, they're like blood vessels, but they're not blood vessels. They have the tissue of a blood vessel, but they are lining spaces that are known as sinusoids inside the liver and inside the spleen. Why? Because over there we monitor and we scan and we find out whether or not the red blood cells are durable and they are healthy and anatomically and physiologically intact to return back to the circulation and operate to a maximum level. Otherwise, if you get trapped in these sinusoids, then the macrophages, known as the sinus histocytes, these are found inside the sinuses that will damage and destroy the red blood vessels. Now, we discussed this very important concept of the perfusion of the capillary bed. Everybody sees the perfusion of the capillary bed. That perfusion there, you see that you have two big blood, actually they're not that big compared to the conducting blood vessels and distributing blood vessels. But compared to the capillary, they are very big. And you need to know your direction. I already showed you the direction here. So one is bringing blood towards, one is bringing blood away from the heart and towards the tissue microcirculation. And the other one is taking blood away from the heart and returning it back towards, away from the venous side of the microcirculation and returning it back to the right heart. So there they are. You see, blue here is my, you see the arteriole. See where my mouse is? The arteriole brought the oxygen rich blood. The arteriole brought the oxygen rich blood. And the blood has now entered into the capillary. What is behind this capillary? And you see the arrows now are going to go out to the tissue. But then in the blue side, the arrow now are going to point to the inside of the blue, and they're going to all empty into the venule. So you need to be able to tell the direction of these arrows. Into the red side and away from the blue side. Is that clear? Veins are known as the capacitance vessels. Veins are known as the capacitance vessels of the cardiovascular system. These are thin-walled and flaccid, and they collapse when they are empty. So why do we call them the capacitance vessels? You need to remember that. You need to remember that veins are the capacitance vessels. This is very important. Veins are the capacitance vessels. Are we clear? Veins are the capacitance vessels. So the veins do not need to be as strong as the arteries because blood is not being pumped into them by the heart. They are just rerouting the blood back into the heart. So you have thin-walled, these are thin-walled and flaccid, and they collapse when they're empty, and there's a greater capacity for blood containment than the arteries. So what does that mean? That means that 64% of your blood is found in the veins. You need to remember that. 64% of your blood is found in the veins. 64% of the blood is found in the veins, and they have steady blood flow, and they are subjected relatively to low blood pressure. So if you examine here, so the typical blood distribution in a resting adult is, you see 64% of the blood is found where? In the veins. So what does that mean? That means if a patient has a stab wound or a gunshot wound or a external hemorrhage bleeding, by the time the ambulance gets there, the veins, like a toothpaste, when you squeeze the toothpaste is going to come out. Supposedly everybody should have done that this morning. When you squeeze the toothpaste is going to come out. They will do that, but for blood. So by the time the ambulance gets there, the veins are gonna squeeze and they're gonna provide you with blood to keep you alive. Meanwhile, until the ambulance get there. As long as the hemorrhage is not severe. If the hemorrhage is very severe, then the blood that is being squeezed from the veins is not enough. So that's why we call them the capacitance vessels, because they squeeze like a toothpaste to give you blood. Capillaries have the lowest amount of blood in the body. How much blood do capillaries have at any point in time? 5%. And veins have 64%. So postcapillary venules, these are the smallest veins, and they consist of the tunica interna with only few fibroblasts around it. And they are even more porous than the capillaries. And you see that the leukocytes leave the bloodstream through the venule walls. Now, when you look at the skeletal muscle pump, this is something that is very important for us to know. Skeletal muscle pump. How does the skeletal muscle pump work? The skeletal muscle pump operates by contracting in order to propel the blood upward. You need to know that. That's very important for you to understand. Now, when blood gets all the way to the bottom, the soles of your feet, that's a tissue also. The blood now needs to come back up to the heart. Blood doesn't go to the feet and stay there. Blood is supposed to go to the feet and return. But the problem is, when the blood is returning back to the heart, from your toes up to your heart, what's the problem there? We're going with gravity or against gravity? We're going against gravity. So that's a big challenge. So to overcome that challenge of having to go against gravity, their skeletal muscles, they squeeze, they contract to push the blood upward. So if you look in that figure, do you see here? Those valves, they allow for one-way passage of blood. If the blood has to return back to the heart, the two muscles have to contract. And when they contract, the blood is going to be sent upward. And when the skeletal muscles relax, what happens to the blood? Does the blood go up or does it pool and return back down? The blood pools and returns down when those skeletal muscles are relaxed. You will see the same theme happening again with the lymph tissue. So the skeletal